worms, these little beauties in here. How to feed them, when to feed them, what you can catch on them, how to chop them. Literally everything to do with worm fishing is going to be covered in this video. I'm going to talk about the process of feeding, cleaning, and how to chop your worms for different situations, because like with all types of fishing, there are like many different ways you can do things. When you get your worms from the tackle shop or the worm farm, wherever you go, they'll come in a bag like this. Usually there's a kilo in here. They'll come stored in some peat. The peat's really good. They'll last for a long time like this. Just keep them on the garage or the shed floor, as long as it's not absolutely freezing cold, like depths of winter. They'll be sound and they'll keep for weeks and weeks and weeks. I actually feed them with a tiny bit of veg scraps sometimes. I've got like a separate like little wormery that I use like for like smaller worms and things, but I can talk you through that in a bit. So once I've got my worms, what I tend to do, like when I get to my peg, is I'll put them into like a bait tub. So like this. So they'll be in there with the peat. I'll grab like a big handful of that, and then what you'll find is that they'll sort of congeal into like one area. And for a lot of fishing, and especially when you're fishing for like roach, skimmers, perch sometimes, I tend to like to feed them and wash them off. I mean, you'll see a lot of anglers doing this. I mean, usually I'll just grab like a net like that, something, give them a little like wash in you know, in the side or something where you're not going to be disturbing any of your peg. Wash them off and they'll actually come out like this. So what'll happen is they'll all like ball up and congeal up, and they leave like little tiny bits of peat that'll all float. So I kind of want to get rid of that. And then what I'll do is I'll chop them up, and depending on what I'm targeting, so like today where we are, they're gonna be fairly small, fairly finely chopped. Like I'll give them a right good snip with the scissors, so they're nice and fine. There's plenty of attractant there. But on other occasions, and like sometimes like when I'm fishing a river, like on a chop worm feeder or something, I'll get them and I'll literally cut them up like that. And then I'll add a tiny little bit of water into it. And what that'll make is like, it'll make like a little black cloud in the water. I'm actually going to do a little bit of that today as well, which I'll run you through again. But you can add soil to that as well when you're fishing with them, to like plug it inside a feeder. Makes like a really nice, attractive, like little cloud as it goes in, and then you've just got a few worms there. And obviously your hook bait next to it. That can be absolutely deadly for catching perch and chubbing things on rivers. But for the purpose of this video and the fishing today, we're going to be targeting like some nice silverfish, some skimmers, roach, perch, and maybe a carp or two as well. So I'm going to get these like this. They're pretty much all cleaned off there, look. And then it's not... So this isn't quite full. I don't want this absolutely full, right? Because when you start chopping them, it's going to go absolutely everywhere, you know. I'll always do it over another bait tub. And then what I'm going to do is I've got my triple bladed scissors there. I've just made these. I've probably had them, I don't know, 15 years now. Like, they're just a cheap pair of scissors, and I've just gaff taped them all up at the end. And then just take them and start fairly slow, go into them. And what you'll find is they'll actually reduce in volume as you're going through it. So today, like I say, I want them quite fine. You can start to get a little bit faster. And you'll notice what I'm doing is, while I'm chopping it, I'm spinning the pot round. So you can use anything. As long as I normally use a 250ml pot. It's easier than trying to chop them all in a big bait tub like that. You want something a bit more condensed, so just make the job easier for yourself, really. We'll go through them like that, and if you see that there, but you get all that like that juice and stuff on them. They're quite fine. I mean, I'm going to go over them again in about another 4 or 5 minutes time, just to go back through them again, because I want them really fine for like feeding one of the areas today. But then, so in fact, I'll put them in there and I'll show you how I'm going to do my other one. So my other one that I'm going to feed, so I'm going to feed a line down the edge today, and I want to try and catch some perch there. Now, sometimes feeding it in the peat can be good, and what I'm probably going to do is I'll get a little bit more of this peat out of this bag, just riddle it off, add it to another small bait tub and add a little bit of water to it. So I'll chop these up like that, and you can, I don't know if you can see that in there, but you see the difference inside. Like they sort of like stick together almost. So like when you add a bit more peat to that and a bit of water, you can actually feed it. They're like little worm bombs, like that. That can be really, really good, like on its own. Obviously, you can also clean them, add some casters to them or some dead maggots, and that'd be another way that you can feed it. I'm actually going to add this here to some ground bait today, and I'm going to hopefully catch some skimmers over it, maybe a few roach as well. But this one I'm going to feed for like perch down the edge. I might catch a carp there and whatnot. But so this is what I'm doing today. But like in the summer months, you might find that, you know, when all the fish are more active and you want to target bigger fish, so like maybe some bigger perch on a canal or a river. Obviously you can use lobworms as well, many other different types of worms. But you might wash them off like I've just shown the process there, but then just roughly chop them, really roughly chop them, so like hardly show them with the scissors. It'll leave you with great big bits like that are all broken, and that can be absolutely brilliant for big fish. So for like I said, perch, bigger bream, chub, anything will eat them. Eels. Worms are a fantastic bait for catching a big variety of fish. So that's how you go about your different ways that you can chop them. Obviously, like I've said before, there are lobworms to consider, red worms. You know, if the fishing's particularly hard, you might think about chopping some red worms for skimmers or just to get a bite. Sometimes that can be an instance where you might need to do that. But they're your sort of options with the worms that you've got. And you can then add other baits to these at different times. So like today, I'm going to add maybe some casters to this one. I'll probably add a few dead maggots to this one. So I'm actually feeding it in two completely different ways. I'm using the same bait, but feeding it in two completely different ways. And then I'll go through later, like what sort of size hook baits you need to use over the top, what works best with, you know, what particular method. And yeah, just go through things in a little bit more detail, really. Okay, so here today at Makins Fishery on Lagoon Lake, and we're going to go through all the different areas of the peg we're going to feed. So we're going to do things slightly different in different areas, and I'm going to go through each one and explain the reasons behind why I'm feeding each one in each way. So I'll start off nearest to me, so at 5 meters here. I'm going to feed in there. I've got some worms, some casters. There's probably 50 mil of each, and then 250 mil of ground bait. I've wetted that up, and I can make a nice little ball like that. Nice wetted up ground bait. And I'm probably going to kick off that line with a ball that sort of size. Now, the reason I'm feeding it like that is it is actually quite silty, this lake. for one. The other reason is when that goes like near the bottom, it's going to take the fish a little while, so it'll have a little bit of attraction there, but it's going to take the fish a little while to get to them like little bits of bait. So if I spread that out in my hand, look, it's probably only like 10 casters in there, a couple of bits of worm. I'm also probably going to loose feed a few casters over that line, because that's where I fancy catching some roach. Might catch a perch there, maybe catch some skimmers there late, but we'll see. But that's my short line. I'm also going to feed another line off the edge of those trees with exactly the same mix, feed it in exactly the same way, just a little bit at the start, and then I'm going to use a small pole mounted pot and just tap in little tiny bits of bait at a time and just fish to my bites. So little tiny bits like that. So I'm actually feeding those two in two different ways, but I'm feeding it with the same mixture. Okay, 2 more lines to run through. The next one, and where I fancy catching, there's a few big perch in this lake and that. Down towards this tree here, it's a good depth, and I'm going to feed this little mixture here. So in here, I've got some peat that I've riddled off the worms. There's probably about 75 mil of worms in that. There's probably 300 mil, 350 mil of peat in there, and stuck a few casters in as well. And then down that edge there, I'm gonna put odd balls in like that. Nice when that goes in, plenty of attraction there. It's gonna break up. It'll get down to the bottom. I can tailor it a little bit if I want to, and add a little bit more water to it, make it a bit more sloppy if I want to. Can also stiffen it up if I need to. Maybe even add some ground bait to it. But I'm going to feed little balls like that, and then I'm going to also loose feed a few casters with a catapult over the top of that line, just to have a bit of something going through the water. So that's line number 3. And then I've also got one other line that I'm going to feed directly in front of me in open water with some ground bait and worms. There's actually an odd little maggot in there, odd pinky, but not many. There is 100 mil of worms in there to 5 pots of ground bait, so it's quite rich. But the mix is actually quite a sweet mix. It's mixed nice and damp. Look, really damp. Actually add a little bit more water to it after I've added my worms into my ground bait, and then all I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in a cup, like straight in, pop it in, and feed it nice and loose like that. Create a bit of a carpet, and then on that line I can target skimmers, maybe odd carp on it, and just use small bits of worm on the hook, maybe a maggot, and feed it that way. So I'm feeding like a bigger area, but I want to leave that and give it some time to settle, which is when I'll bring the other lines in. So that's my different lines. That's how I'm going to feed them. Gives you different ways of catching. And there's usually, on any given day, there's usually one that is a lot better than the other. Now, you can sometimes change one of those lines, and so say, I don't know, say if this peat's working really well on that line, there's nothing to stop me feeding a little bit at 5 meters, or on my long line at 14 meters. It might make it, improve it and make it even better. So there's a couple of different ways we can do things. So I'm going to go through that today, show you how to catch some fish on worms, and hopefully bag up. Right, so started the session off, kicked off all our lines, and I've started at 14 meters over towards that tree, because I feel like that is just the best place for me to get a bite to begin with. Don't want to start obviously right next to me at 5 meters, because it's probably going to take the fish a little while to get there. I don't want to go down the edge straight away. Nice roach. Don't want to go down the edge straight away because I want to just give that a little bit of time. Lovely roach, that one. So I've just basically started off for 40 minutes just off the edge of that tree there, just feeding a tiny little overwet ball of ground bait with some worms in it, odd caster. Started off with a maggot on the hook to begin with, and something I do a lot when sort of like fishing in this way and when you're fishing with worms is you'll find that you get a better response off starting on like a maggot or a caster to begin with. Probably usually anyway, start on a maggot to begin with. And then you're almost like progressing your way up to what you're actually feeding. Worms can take a little while to kick in sometimes. And it can be good, like really good towards the end of your session. Can be good to begin with if it's like warm enough for it. But because we've had a cold night like last night, and just want to go quite steady to begin with. So I've had a couple of fish on maggot to begin with, then I've tried worm, had a bite on it. Don't feel like it's quite right just yet. So in another half hour, 45 minutes, we've been fishing a bit longer, fed it a little bit more. Probably give it another go. Just so, like I say, just like work your way into it. And just sort of feel your way into your session. I mean, in a match, a pleasure session. What I'm doing, I'm just settle that rig up. Just loose feeding an odd few casters, just to make a bit of something through the water around where I'm fishing. I feel like I need to put something through the water. Obviously, I'm loose feeding my short line as well. I've been pinging casters down towards that tree down there, and I've like re-fed that twice as well. Not like with massive amounts of bait, just with the same cup, same kit. Because I'm fishing everything I'm fishing is at 14 meters, so I'm making it really easy for myself to be able to like rotate my lines. That requires a different rig than line down there, but I can feed it because I'm holding my pole at the same distance. I'm not having to take a section on, section off, and just starting to put one or two fish together now. Getting better slowly. It was like I said, it was a really cold night last night, so not expecting it to be good straight away. But we'll just plod along, see what we catch. So since I've been fishing, I can get odd indications over my bait. I'm actually fishing a little bit past it now, and I've gone to my lightest rig. So this is like it's a 0.1, so a 4x10. And it's got a carbon stem, this one, instead of the 0.2 that I was using. That's got a metal stem for keeping the bait obviously a bit more stable. Just feel like they were just, because it's really still, just almost feel like the fish were picking it up but like rejecting it. Missed like sort of 4 or 5 bites. Just a little change sometimes, just getting that odd extra fish. Something I do quite a lot. I've set a carbon and a wire up. Sometimes wire's better, and you can, for keeping your bait nice and still on a bar, especially like for skimmers. Sometimes obviously I'm catching an odd roach at the moment. That's sort of what's feeding at the minute, so I'm fishing a little bit lighter rig with a carbon stem, just so it gives it a little bit more of a fall through the last third of the water. Right, so I've caught a couple of roach off my long line, and it's sort of like just staying the same. It's not really getting any better. So what I started doing, I started pinging a log caster there, and I'm going to just now feed a little bit of a bigger ball, still through my little pot, just a slightly bigger ball, and just come off it for like a couple of minutes. I'm just going to go and have a look down this edge here, see if I can see what's at home. So I've just gone down here with where I've fed them worms and casters in the peat, and sort of like really looking to target, like fancy it for like a perch or two down here. I'm pinging an odd few casters over the top of it, and it looks a bit carpy as well, like probably a carp there. I'm only fishing light, so just trying to get a few bites to begin with, but first look on it, fed it a couple of times with the same like peat mix with the worms and casters in it. Just doing something a little bit different, to be honest. You don't always have to fish and feed your lines all exactly the same in the same way, like all with ground bait, or you know, I might change that up again if I don't feel like it's working. I can perhaps put a bit of like neat worm there, neat worm and casters, and just cup that in. It's been a really cold night last night, so I think we've probably been fishing an hour now. Everything just takes a little bit longer to sort of get going and fish wake up. Sun's on the water now, which is, I can feel it on my back, so it's definitely warming through a little. Just a case of having a look around the lines. I want to leave them a longer positive ground bait line, a little bit longer, where I put like a bigger quantity of worms in. Leave that a little bit longer. So I'm just going to quickly run you through all the different hook baits and choices to do with when we're fishing with worms. Obviously, you can use whatever bait you want over the top when fishing worms. They are really good, and they have good versatility in that respect. Like you can use maggots, casters with them, pinkies, all sorts. But like for your main hook baits, really, usually when you're fishing for silverfish, like you know, quality roach skimmers and stuff on a commercial setting, for example, that normally head of a worm or the tail of a worm is really good. And when I say that, I'm talking that tiny little bit there, like a little tiny bit. Sometimes even where you chop your worms up and you might have some like still left in your tub, one of the tiny little rings of the worm, like the inside bit, can be an excellent bait. You'd be surprised what you can catch on. Obviously, if we're targeting bigger fish on like rivers and things, big worms are favourable. Lob worms, dendras, 2, 3 on a big hook can be fantastic bait. Obviously, you know, you can even give these a go. You know, a place like this can sometimes work for carp and like bigger perch and stuff. And then you've got another alternative is to like do like what's called like a cocktail, where you know you might have like say an inch of a worm there and tip it with a caster or a pinky or a maggot. Just give it a bit more visualization, you know, with something more for them to home in on. So there's that, and then I've got some lovely little, almost like, well, they are red worms really, these, like keep them in a heap in the garden, feed them on veg scraps, tiny little baits there. These are great when it's hard and difficult fishing. Skimmers love them, perch, caught some big roach on them in the past, and on a difficult day, it can sometimes get you a bite. I mean, if you look at that one there, look, that, it's almost like a big bloodworm. It's like a real, just a nice little mouthful for them to get in. So yeah, they're all the hook baits that you can use. And like I say, you can use maggots, like double maggot, caster, double caster over the top, dead maggots, dead pinkies. So many different options when you're fishing with worms. It's the real good versatile bait. Gone on the positive line where I fed that 750mm bait at the start, full of worms, and I've had a skimmer, and I think this feels like another skimmer. It could be, yeah, it's a small one. Back with a load of stuff, that one. Get rid of that. And a small one. It's just that one. It's just been a difficult day, but I feel like there is some skimmers on that longer line at the moment, but it's a case of being patient. I am going to try this chuck, one of these small little worms I've got inside here. Really small one, I think. It's always worth when you're fishing, like having a go with different baits, because one day one thing might be like really, really good. In fact, so I've got a tiny little worm on there. I'm gonna tip it with a pinky. It's normally a good skimmer bait, that. I'm gonna top it up. No need to top that up at the moment. I'm just going to feed a little bit of bait on my other line. Keep that one going. Keep all these lines going. Just feed down there. A little ball in there. It's just a tiniest little nugget like this. Just got to keep the other lines fed while I go on this. So I'm going to flick the bait out past where my bait is. And there's just a tiny little bit of draw on the water in a minute from right to left. Only ever so slightly. But I feel like if I flip my rig ever so slightly to my left and further out, I feel like that's the place where I'm most likely to get a bite, like right on the back edge of my feed. I've got it in line with my marker over there, so I know exactly where I fed at the start. Because there's just this tiny little bit of drift that way. I think it could be moving the bait ever so slightly underneath the water, only fractionally, a tiny little bit, but because of how I fed it as well, I didn't feed it in balls, I potted it loose. It spreads out a little bit anyway, and obviously when the fish come over it, they'll spread it around a little more. So although it's important to be accurate and know where your bait's gone, fishing all around it. See that one, right on it there, right on the edge of it, that was. Right on the edge of it. That was on a worm. Tipped with a pinky. Got to be really careful with him on it because the lake is so shallow. So the moment you hook one, they spook really, really easily. But I kind of feel like we've left that line long enough across in front of us, where we've fed that amount of bait at the start, that it's had enough time to settle, and then fish are gathered and could actually have a good end to it. Quick little tip for you here. Always got a pot of water on the side tray, alright? A little tub of water. Before I feed, I make sure my cup's nice and clean, like that, and I actually wet the inside of it. So any bait I'm going to put in there, especially when you're mixing it like this, and you've got a wet ball, go inside there, look. Not going to stick to the inside of the cup. You're not going to leave your bait out. See? Nice and clean. Everything goes where you want it to go. Okay? Just a little quick tip. When I caught that last fish last time, I'm going to, this time, because I've caught a couple over my bait or just off the back of it, this time I'm going to put my little dolly butt on and go a tiny bit further past. So I know I'm definitely fishing at least 50 centimetres past my bait now. Flick that rig out, hold it, lower it down. The amount of times this works, and it's good at some stage of the day, is incredible, especially for skimmers. Unbelievable how good this can be, to be honest. Doesn't always work, but on a lot of venues, fish this time of year, especially when it's cold, they will sit past your bait. So it's important to always have that little bit of extra room to go a tiny bit further, should you need to. Just giving yourself that like another little option. I've got two small bits of, well, they're almost like red worms, so I've got 2 bits of red worm and a pinky on at the minute. Gone past my bait this time. I mean, it might be a day where they smack on the bait, and that's where you need to catch them. That's gone. That was a better bite. Oh no! Oh no! 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 That's not good, Adam. Foul up that was, I think. Think so. Bastard. Yeah, so I think what I've done there, I've picked up an indication. Went properly. It did go properly. So I've lost one, and it was like almost in the peg. I pulled it slightly out of the way. So what I'm going to do now, this is some of the original mix that I did, so I'm going to add a little bit more water to that. It's still got my worms in there, odd maggot still. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet my cup again, and I'm just going to make a little soft ball. I mean, I want this to actually, I do want this to break up. Just a little bit like paste, so about that sort of size, like little conker. I'm just going to add half a dozen casters to that. Still got some worms inside it, but because I lost that fish there in the area, it could well have spooked them. So what I want to do is just give it a tiny little top up. Bearing in mind I haven't topped this up all day. Don't put any more bait there at all. I'm just going to hold the cup up to the water and just like a little tiny plop. I want it to make a little bit of noise. Like, almost like draw them back in. I think call it a day there with a small skimmer. So get him one hooked. Lovely little skimmer. Let's get bites this time of year. So hopefully you've enjoyed the video and learned a few things about worms and the various ways in which we can feed them, how powerful they are in attracting fish into your peg, and how versatile it is as well, and the amount of baits you can use over the top of it to maximise your catches. It's not all about just going down one hole and fishing the same way. So I hope you've learned a few things, and I'll catch up with you next time.